Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Vidor Locksmith Show. My name is David Gibson, and I am happy you guys are here with us today. We've got an amazing show lined up for you guys today. It's going to be action-packed. I know that we've got a lot of people from around the world watching today. This is so exciting to be able to continue to keep bringing these class-style sessions to everybody. For some reason, it feels like Friday because that's normally when I'm doing these things, but it's Wednesday. It's the middle of the week. So hopefully you guys are taking time away from important meetings and other things that you probably should be doing to join us here on LinkedIn Live. I am still trying to get my LinkedIn Live stuff brought up on my computer. It's not working quite yet, so I'm gonna have to look down at my phone just to be able to make sure. If any of you guys can hear me, please let me know. Make sure that the audio and everything's coming through good. That definitely helps out with making sure that the show goes smoothly for you guys. Because if you can't hear me, it's probably not going to work. Well, then again, you're not here to hear me talk. You're definitely here to hear the guest. So we have an amazing guest, and we'll bring him on now. Thank you so much, Neil Armstrong, for joining us today. How are you?
Great. Thanks very much, David. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here with you.
All right, guys, as per normal, please let us know where you guys are watching from. If you guys have any questions throughout the show, the whole reason we're doing this is so that we can interact live with you guys that are out there. So if you have any questions, if there's anything that we can answer as we're going through this, if we want to stop us during the presentation or anything, raise your hand, hit the little keyboard, let us know. The other thing is share this or just tag somebody else who you think would be interested in watching this. Just tag them in the comment section. They'll see their name pop up on the notifications. They'll click the link, and then hopefully they'll come over here and join us in the presentation today. So we've got a lot of people talking and commenting there. So I'm guessing everybody can hear me because nobody's saying we can't hear you. So that's usually a good thing. All right. So to be able to get started, so we've already got Amy Fox. We've got Jelena Tiago, Paul Cooper from Scotland, Ricardo, Peter, Salim, Joey Hooper. So we've got people from Houston, Ecuador, Colombia, Edmonton, Alberta, more from Colombia, Odessa. So thank you guys all for watching this morning. Allison Grogan who's tuned in. Thank you, Allison. Appreciate that. Alistair Gunn. Like I said, guys, please tag somebody else that's within your network that you think would be able to gain some knowledge from what we're talking about today. So Neil, give us a quick little introduction of what we are going to be talking about today.
So we're going to be talking about drilling problems and some of the most common drilling problems. So we looked at 50 problem events over a 10-year period. There were 50 BHAs lost. We did problem reviews on them, and I've got some sort of learnings from those, and some of them we're going to cover some of the most common problems.
Excellent. We still got everybody kind of piling that's coming in. We're already up to 115 people watching, so that's excellent. Thank you guys so much. Robert Wafer just tuned in as well. Donald McKay. Everybody's kind of tagging their friends. This is great. This is how we build a community in the oil and gas. We help each other out. This is a free education. I can definitely tell you this: when these guys put on class, it is not free. So this is definitely the time to be able to come in and participate. So we'll jump into some of the questions. So Neil, give me a little bit of a background on you. How did you get into the ERD world?
Well, so I left the army. When was that? 2000. Went to Schlumberger. Went straight to Algeria. Was thrown out on a rig out there. Knew nothing. And then spent 6 weeks on a rig, and then learned a lot very quickly. Spent 3 years with Schlumberger. Then I went to ExxonMobil as a drilling engineer, and spent 9 years with ExxonMobil. Worked UK North Sea, SYU California, a little bit in the Gulf of Mexico, and then Malaysia. And during that time, I was just lucky enough to have been involved in high-angle wells from the start, and really challenging wells, even in Algeria. So it kind of became my expertise by luck, and I loved it. I really loved the engineering part of it. It's like problem solving. How do we make this work? And then after Malaysia, I decided, I really wanted to focus on that, on just the engineering part, and that's when I joined Merlin, and that was 7 years ago now.
Wow. Well, then, I just want to say, so we do have Stuart McGregor watching. So happy to have some of the other Merlin folks. I hope that Ian McCourt is staying up past his bedtime, at least for once, to be able to watch
he'll have his cup of Ovaltine. He'll be sitting there in his recliner listening in.
I love giving him so much slack now because for people that don't know, Ian used to be my boss or whatever when I worked back in Australia. When I worked for Schlumberger many moons ago, so Ian was my boss. So now I kind of poke fun at him every once in a while online. So hopefully he's watching today and here with us. So give me a little bit of background on Merlin ERD. I know one of the things that we had talked about before, that it's now an employee-owned company. How does that come about to be? And, how does that, kind of change y'all's day-to-day working there at Merlin?
Yeah, it kind of makes us unique. So Merlin, we're a specialist drilling engineering consultancy company, and we specialize in extended reach wells, but really we get involved in a lot of just challenging wells. Anything really. We've even been involved with some vertical wells that have got problems. So wells with problems we get involved with. And it's all about reducing risk and improving performance. So we get involved in engineering, training, and rig site support. A couple of years ago, our original founder, Ian Hutchison, sold the company into employee ownership. Him the two original founders, Ian and his wife, Debbie, sold 70% to an employee trust. So now the employees are beneficiaries of that trust. So, we share in dividends, and it's worked really well. It encourages the employees to behave like business owners, which I would have thought is the kind of holy grail for most businesses.
I definitely think that would help out. Sorry for anybody if you guys hear an echo. It's just part of the audio thing that we're doing. It takes a couple of seconds for it to catch up, but hopefully it won't distract too many people. The good thing is that I won't be talking during most of this. So I've got one more question, Neil, before we jump into the class time here. What is one of the oddest problems that you guys have solved at the drilling rig? Or on a well, or done engineering for? What was something that just like completely out of nowhere got you guys?
The oddest problem. Let's come back to that.
Okay.
We'll answer that at the end of this, because it'll come to me while we're going through this presentation.
All right, guys. Well, before we jump in, so we finished up the intro. Before we jump into the intro, I've got a couple little, pay the bills moments here, because this is brought to you by Gibson Reports, and we don't have any sponsors for the show. That's why we're able to bring you guys so much content and unfiltered content. So I do want to be able to share this with you guys. So for anybody that is watching, please stay tuned. Tomorrow we will have, I will be going live with SPE at 2:30 Central Time. So that's 2:30 Houston time, with George King, to be talking about better practices for well shut-in and startup. That will be on SPE Live. So if you guys are following SPE International on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, you will be able to see it on all 4 of those channels. And real quick, we've also got later today a new episode of How It's Done. So we'll play a little quick intro for How It's Done, and then we'll get started. All right, so there it is, guys. That was just a quick little promo that we've got coming up. We've got another episode being released today. If you guys haven't seen some of the previous episodes, last week we did one with Archotech where we did their stators, so to be able to see the whole process on how a stator's created. We've done some stuff with Drilling Tools International on one of their reamers. We've done a couple other episodes. Be sure to go and check those guys out. They are great information videos on really being able to get to see behind the scenes stuff. So one last chance here, you guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. We do appreciate it. Let us know where you guys are watching from. If you guys have any questions as we get started during the presentation, please let us know. And please tag one of your friends, tag somebody in your network. Let's see if we can beat the numbers from the Fred Dupriest episode. Once again, this is free. This is just going to help out other people. Let everybody else know. Let's learn about some of these drilling problems. So with that, Neil, I'm going to turn it over to you, sir. So we are now into the class time session, and then I'll bring this one up. So the floor is yours, sir.
Great. Well, thanks very much. So actually I'll go back to the beginning. So I put all this work together, maybe about a year ago, with the aim of identifying some of the most common root causes of drilling problem events, so we could share the learnings. So we get involved in a lot of problem reviews when operators lose BHAs. So, and we want to be able to share these learnings. So I want to prevent the pain caused by planting a BHA in the ground. That benefits no one. Well, unless the work's really scarce and the tool provider would rather have the BHA planted in the ground and the loss and haul cost rather than the tools. But really it benefits no one. It adds to the cost of wells. It makes operators more conservative. And both of those things are going to limit the wells that get drilled, which is not good. So, and generally as an industry, we're not great at learning from our mistakes. We don't invest much time in a thorough analysis of problems. We tend to ignore the near misses, and there's a lot of value in the near misses. And we rarely share outside of our organizations, unless we're forced to by regulators after a spectacular failure. And we rely on the knowledge of individuals. They tend to hold the lessons learned. Actually, this is a good opportunity for a plug for a guy called Norman Ritchie who runs VPSI Group, and he's kind of an expert on institutional learning, and how to embed processes into companies that allow corrective actions to be retained and implemented by companies. So it's all about sort of organization learning rather than individual learning. So I would really recommend you look at that VPSI Group. Anyway, so before I start, I'll just let you know I'm not immune from losing BHAs. I'll put my cards out on the table now. I've lost 3 BHAs when I've been the senior drilling engineer, the lead engineer for a while in my time. Lost 2 in the Beryl field, and I lost 1 offshore California. So, it's pretty tough as a drilling engineer. You've got a lot of balls to juggle. So I also appreciate that, but you've got to focus on the things that would really spoil your day. So what are they? I always used to focus on the HSE side. A major safety incident is going to spoil your day. Well control and a stuck pipe event. So those are the key things that I really used to focus on. There's a lot of other distractions. You're preparing updates for management, your cost reconciliations and the likes, but those are the things you really need to focus on: the HSE, the well control, and the stuck pipe. That would be my advice anyway. So let's get into the meat of it. So we looked over a 10-year period. We looked at 50 lost BHAs, just using roughly about $5 million per BHA. That works out to be about 250 million in just lost in whole costs. And more than about $1 billion in MPT costs. So all the time it's taking to recover from those events, those stuck pipe events. When I first read the slide, I put most avoidable, but actually they were all avoidable in some way. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on the solutions, but I'm going to highlight the events and talk a little bit about some of the solutions. And all the solutions are relatively simple. David had on a couple of weeks ago Jody Robbins, and he was talking about the research into plasma drill bits, plasma drilling. I'd like to say, we're at the stage now where we just need some whiz-bang tool, plasma drilling, and that's going to solve our problems. But it's not. This is all pretty basic stuff. And it linked to another one of David's guests, Brandon Foster, last week. it's pretty much what he was saying. It's getting drilling engineers engineering again, and covering the basics. And a lot of you will probably be listening to some of this and say, wow, people really do that? That's like drilling 101. Well, yeah, they really do. And we're not, there's no other hidden problem events that I'm not discussing here, that are more complex. It's all pretty simple, basic stuff. So, David, feel free to stop me if you've got any questions on the way through. And also, if you think there's any humdingers that come in on the chat, then feel free to stop me.
Yeah, I'm watching it pretty close. So if anybody, I'm not looking at the camera like I'm normally am doing. I'll probably take myself off the screen here in a minute. I am definitely interacting with everybody I can on the chat. Like I said, guys, we're just about to get into the deep portion of this. Please just take the 2 seconds and think of like 2 or 3 people that you can tag in this so that we can really share. And I know that today's times are very trying times, but at least let's share this free knowledge session with other people that are out there that could benefit from it. So with that, go for it, Neil.
Yep. Okay. So like I said, this is not an ERD presentation. However, I always feel the need to put a nose plot in all of my presentations. It's kind of tradition. But the point of this is it's kind of illustrating of what's possible, because I'm going to spend the next 30 minutes talking about when things go wrong. So I'll just spend a couple of minutes talking about when things go right. 10 out of the 10 longest wells in the world by measured depth have been drilled by one operator, not all in the same location, but 10 out of the 10 longest wells. One of them, which was a world record at the time, back in 2012, was drilled with less than 1% MPT. It was drilled in 60 days, drilled and completed, and that was out to 42,000 feet. So, and all 10 of those wells are greater than 40,000 feet measured depth. So it is possible, and these are complex wells. I mean, the completions are, running screens out to 40,000 feet plus. So pretty complex wells. So if you get it right, that's what's possible. And the success there is due to building on lessons learned, resourcing a team appropriately as well. They've got the equipment they need, they've got the personnel they need, but they're building on lessons learned, and that's the key thing. So I've actually got a question here. So we'll see if anybody can get in and answer this. So these are all of the main problem events ranked, and I want to rank them in order. So here we go. Oh, and I've gone too far. So you need to sign in to this. You need to follow this link, www.merlinerd.com podcast, or use this QR code that you can see on the slide. And then if you go on that QR code, you'll get a question that comes up. There's no login in or anything. It should be relatively simple. And then there should be little arrows, and you can move those options up or down. And if you could just put which one you think is the most common cause of stuck pipe events out of the studies that we did on that list, and then rank them in order, and we'll see how long it takes to get a few responses here, and then I'll talk about the actual order. So while we're doing this, I'll just
let everybody know I did put this the link in the comment section. So if you guys do see that, y'all can just click on the link there, and it'll take you right to the website. You can put in your name, or you can skip past it, either way, and then be able to rank the items, and then be able to kind of live feed back everything in here as we go.
Okay, good. Well, it's changing. Yeah. So while the answers are coming in, I'll just say a couple of things about kind of sort of the limitations of the study. So basically, when we don't get a lot of equipment failure investigation events, they're normally pretty obvious, and they're done in-house. So we tend to get some of the more complex, where the root cause is not quite as easy to identify. So that's a bit of a clue that equipment failure is not high up on that list. So yeah, it's changing every minute. operational practices, hole cleaning, are neck and neck, vying for the first position.
Well, we got a little bit of a chance here. I want to say thank you guys that are watching, and I will say this, just as a quick plug for Merlin. If you guys haven't seen it, there is a ERD plot visualization that's on the IADD website. You guys can also go to that, and it's got all of the ERD wells. I shouldn't say all of them, a comprehensive list of all of the ERD wells that are out there that you guys can go and take a look at and be able to visualize. We've got it kind of up there on the screen. So thank you to our sponsors that are part of that, mainly Merlin ERD, K&M, and HXR. So just as you guys are going through and doing your thing, we got a little bit of time here. I'll just figure out, throw that out there. There we go.
Great, thanks, David. So that's looking pretty stable now. So let's see if it matches reality. So operational practices, yeah. Wellbore stability. So hole cleaning is a little bit higher than what we found. Wellbore stability up there. And then the bottom couple, hole geometry, patterns, and equipment failure are the bottom two. So, people are broadly in the, pretty much in the ballpark there. So quite close. So the next slide kind of shows the problem pie. So, how was it split up? So about 29% of it was related to operational practices. And then pretty close behind, pretty much equal wellbore stability, and then operating limits and planning and differential sticking, 17 and 15%. So there's not much in it. But regardless, of how it's split, the top kind of four were pretty clear, top 4 or 5. So we'll go through each of these in a little bit of detail. So I'll start with operational practices. So this is top of the list because high-risk operational practices are a causal factor in many events. If you think about it, hole cleaning, if hole cleaning's poor, if your operational practices are very good, you can sometimes get away with it. If your operational practice are high risk, then you're at risk of planting a BHA. So when I'm talking about high-risk operational practices, these range from excessive stationary time on connections across a permeable zone, and I think it's pretty obvious what's going to happen next. Or company men obsessed with tripping to the shoe as quickly as possible without pausing to think about what has to come next. That at best he's running the same BHA back to bottom, or worst, he's got a challenging casing run that's coming up. So no thought about conditioning the hole and cautiously coming out. It's about getting to that shoe as fast as possible. So, but the analysis showed that that back reaming was by far the highest risk operation. And this is sort of the worst case scenario occurred on a number of these events whereby it was tripping out the hole, BHA pulled tight into a cuttings bed, and then pumps were just brought up and the rotary immediately to go into back reaming. So that's kind of your recipe for a pack-off event. And if you're unlucky, a planted BHA. So I'm not saying back reaming is the root of all evil, or it should be avoided at all costs. There are legitimate reasons for back reaming, but people need to be aware it is a high risk operational practice, and it needs to be justified. And it's not just to avoid a stuck pipe event, but it's also for borehole quality, and extending the life of the tools in the hole and the bit. So the next most prevalent event cause of these problems was wellbore instability. So So if your shaker house looks like that picture on the right, then you know you've got a wellbore stability problem. And it's almost always caused by inadequate mud weight. You know, it's a wellbore stability study is a complex piece of work to pull together, but the final result is pretty simple. It's a mud weight, and sometimes a mud type recommendation. But if you're getting a wellbore stability study done, chances are you know that you're going to be needing oil-based mud. So the recommendation is invariably a mud weight. And often the problems we see are stability related, and it's just purely due to inadequate mud weight. And it's often just a conservative approach to managing losses. So operators are prioritizing losses over wellbore instability. And sometimes it's because fracture gradient data is inadequate. But we do also see occasionally some fairly outlandish practices whereby mud weights run as low as possible to prevent invasion into fissile shales, so pre-fractured shales. And clearly it's beneficial to avoid mud invasion into these fissile shales, but and that's not going to help stability. But running a mud weight as low as possible is not the strategy for that. Appropriate use of bridging solids is. So we do occasionally see some outlandish practices like that, and that's probably one of the oddest things that we've seen recently. Swab, it's not unusual for us to see no modelling done, and no pulling speeds being given, pulling speed limits being given to the driller, and also drillers thinking once they're encased hole, they can then pull as fast as they want as soon as they're encased hole. Unaware that the pressure the pressure drop caused by the swab once an encased hole is still having an effect on the bottom of the hole or the interval that's potentially unstable. So a lot of the time when we're seeing wellbore stability problems, operators think they have a hole cleaning problem, when the reality is the thing they're trying to clean 12.25-inch hole, but really the hole's much larger than that, 20 inches or more in some places. So obviously your annual velocity is going down. You've got additional material in the hole from cavings, and that's when your hole cleaning really becomes a problem. And then that's your real trouble area as well for pack-offs while back reaming. As soon as you bring this large OD components into the enlarged areas, as soon as the top stabilizer enters while you're back reaming, it's going to mobilize a lot of material and then pack you off in the gate section above. It's really high risk. And the problem is you don't know you've got a problem until you've got that problem, and it's pretty serious, until you start seeing cavings over the shakers. And it's irreversible. So a next pretty common problem we see is operating limits and poor planning from a limits and load perspective. So on high angle wells, it's critical to know, you've got to know what your limits are, and you've got to know what your loads are as accurately as possible. So that involves modeling. It's surprising how often we see at the rig site where the drillers are unaware of what their pull limits are. I'm showing a combined loading plot on this slide here. And again, it's surprising how few procedures we see with combined loading plots in, and engineers who are really just completely unaware of the existence of combined loading plots for drill pipe. This one's actually showing some data that's plotted on the chart, the black dots, which show the torque and pull that was applied to a stuck pipe, to some 5 7/8 drill pipe when it was differentially stuck. And the green region showing the safe operating area, which is bounded by the torque limit for the connection, and then the arc is showing the pipe body with a safety factor. And you can see from that the pipe was not worked through to its limits or within the safe boundaries. So if it had been more aggressively, then the pipe may have been freed. So it's a case of knowing your limits. And that doesn't just relate to the equipment, it also relates to geological limits. And as I was talking earlier on the previous slide about wellbore stability, it's not unusual to have pretty inadequate data when it comes to fracture gradients and also wellbore stability requirements for mud weights. So, I suppose the message there is collecting good data and good data on previous wells. So, and looking at and making sure that all the offsets are studied closely. So, so that's doing leak-off tests rather than just FITs, and collecting that data for future programs, which is also linked to modelling loads. So the offset wells are critical, and looking at offset wells and investing the time in your offset well review to collect the data, to gather all the data and analyse the friction factors and do some hindcast modelling, so you can then accurately predict your loads and then get a good handle on the margin you have between loads and limits. And there's just a plot to the right, just showing an example of a buckling chart. So next on the list was differential sticking. So this was probably disproportionately represented in our data set, because one operator had 4 lost BHAs in a 2-year period due to differential sticking. So they actually had 7 differential sticking events in...
Neil.
Yep.
So, sorry to interrupt. I hate to do this, but we did have 2 questions that came in just a second ago.
Okay.
How about managed pressure drilling to be able to cope with this issue? And then also, and that was from Juan Munoz. So Juan, thank you for joining in. And then Saeed asked, what do you mean by geological limits? Kindly explain.
Yeah, okay.
And then I'll
No
see
problem at all. Yeah, so geological limits. What do I mean? I mean, that's when you talk about wellbore stability or wellbore instability, we're invariably talking about compressive failure of the wellbore, but really, it could also be tensile failure of the wellbore, i.e., inducing losses. So it's really the geological, your bounding limits for your formation. So what's going to, what pressure will fracture your formation, and below what pressure will you get compressive failure in the wellbore. So those are the operating limits. I mean, there's also pore pressure as well that needs to be taken into account. So those are the geological limits I'm talking about, and then ensuring that your drilling loads are within those limits. So your ECD, your swab, and your surge limits loads are within those geological boundary limits. And and of course, it's not unusual to have very narrow margins between those loads and limits. Sometimes, almost no window at all. In which case, you need to look at some more innovative solutions than just ECD management, and that's where MPD plays its part. And it's critical. I mean, some wells just simply could not be drilled without it. So it's absolutely critical. It does play a key part. And it's going to become more and more prevalent. I think in 10, 15 years' time, we'll look back and say, did we really drill wells with them open? And probably all wells will be drilled with a rotating head and closed using some sort of managed pressure drilling. Okay, so back to differential sticking. So I was saying it's probably disproportionately represented in our data set because one operator that we looked at had 4 4 lost BHAs due to differential sticking, and 7 events, but managed to recover from 3 of them. And interestingly enough, the difference between a $20 million MPT event, which was 1 lost BHA and then plugging back in high angle hole and then sidetracking and re-drilling, all coming to a $20 million MPT event. The difference between that and just one line item on the daily drilling report, which said, pulled 90K over after the connection to free pipe, and then reamed stand, drilled ahead and reamed stand to condition filter cake, and then no further problems after that. So the difference between that was just recognition and response to differential sticking. Differential sticking is actually a fairly easy sticking mechanism to identify. Now, it's the only sticking mechanism that you're going to get after a period of stationary pipe, and where you've got no movement in any direction. So you can't turn the pipe, you can't pick up, you can't slack off, but you've got full circulation with no restrictions to flow, so no standpipe pressure change. So it's actually fairly easy to identify. So providing you know what your operating limits are for your drill pipe, you should be able to respond quickly and aggressively to that and get free. The driller's always got to get in his head that when he's stationary over a permeable zone, then he is getting stuck. It's just a question of how stuck he's getting. And more surface contact area you've got, then the faster you're going to get stuck. So this stops section that stops at the bottom is your recipe for differential sticking. You need to have all those elements, all 5 of those elements, in order to get differentially stuck. If you could eliminate one of them, then you would not get differentially stuck. But a lot of the time, operators are just focusing on overbalance, a bit on permeable filter cake, but most of the time it's just overbalance and reducing mud weights, and then that's causing other problems, namely borehole instability. So you need to manage all of them. Unfortunately, you can't eliminate any one of those. You've always got to, at some point, the pipe's always stationary. You need your filter cake. And overbalance, you may be able to eliminate that with managed pressure drilling. Permeable formation, you have to drill it. You don't have any choice. You can reduce the interval through it. Sometimes you've got the flexibility to reduce the angle through it, inclination, but invariably you're going to have to drill through a permeable formation. Surface contact is a big hitter. You can manage that by using stabilization, eliminating unnecessary collars, eliminating unnecessary heavyweight drill pipe, and using standoff on jars, etc. So there are ways to reduce the risk, but yeah, it's pretty common, and we're seeing more and more differential sticking events because there's more and more depleted formations being drilled at high angle. So what was next? Hole cleaning. So hole cleaning, a lot of hole cleaning problems are caused by hole enlargement, so generated by borehole instability. A lot of problems we see are also caused by tool limits, so rotary speed limits, often motors, with unnecessarily high bends on them, and unnecessarily conservative rotary speed limits, and using that. So what I'm talking about there is, there's often a limit for when you're in the tangent, a limit for in the curve, a limit for on bottom and off bottom, and often the most conservative of those is used for the entire section that you're drilling. And then also another very common issue is just the low end rheology of the drilling fluid. So most of the time we're focusing on the 6 RPM is too low, and sometimes it can be on the low side at surface when the mud engineer is doing his tests, but downhole conditions, it's below what's adequate for hole cleaning. So, and for hole cleaning, it's all about the system. It's the whole system. It's your rotary speed, your rheology, and your annular velocity, and how it all works together. And time as well, investing the time at the end at TD to clean up before you trip. So, equipment failure. So, like I said, we don't see that many equipment failure issues leading directly to stuck pipe events. There may be others. There may be more in the industry that we just don't see. But the ones we have seen are related to drill pipe. We can't really overstate the importance of QA, QC of equipment on long, challenging wells, but particularly drill pipe. And then also preemptive maintenance on prior to critical hole sections on some of the key equipment, particularly the pumps and the top drive. So some of the stuck pipe events that we have seen that have been related to equipment failure have been pumping equipment going down, so pumps going down and drilling ahead with inadequate flow rates for hole cleaning, and then also top drives leaking, wash pipes leaking, and then you're stuck in open hole with the inability to rotate or circulate. And if you've been drilling at a high rate and you've got a high cuttings bed, then you might not be able to get to the shoe to fix your top drive, and then you're in open hole trying to sort that out. So not a good situation to be in. So that picture next to so I'm showing there on the picture some ceramic liners for the mud pumps, which will significantly increase the life expectancy of the liners, and therefore allowing you to circulate without any issues. And then the Dublin wash pipe system in the top drive there, and that will almost double the length of time that you'll get before a wash pipe leak. So I think finally, this is kind of the last one on the list. Hole geometry and patterns causing stuck pipe events. So sometimes when we put this down as like a root cause of a stuck pipe event, people question it like it's some sort of voodoo. But as if it's some really unusual, unique situation. But in pretty much every section we drill, at some point, we're drilling some sort of whirl-induced pattern in the well. In some formations, that pattern will cause you an issue, and it'll stay. If you're in some softer formations, then as soon as you pick up off bottom and you get stabilizers over it, then clean off the pattern. It might not cause you an issue. But basically, when we're talking about whirl-induced patterns, you think whirl's best thought of is like a sine wave that starts in the BHA. It develops in the BHA, and then when the string's rotated, and the bit's part of that sine wave, so the bit is being moved laterally as part of the sine wave. So all bits are affected by whirl, regardless of what the LWD tools say. The LWD tools tell us what vibrations are doing in the BHA. We have to look at the MSE, the mechanical specific energy, to tell us what the vibrations are doing at the bit. So what are the solutions for this? Well, increased gauge length. So increasing the gauge length, that limits the rate of side cutting, and that means the patterns become more likely to decay in amplitude. So when we're talking about gauge length, we're talking about 4 to 6 inch gauge when you've got a dogleg requirement of less than 5 degrees per 100 foot. So the image, the borehole image over on the far right is showing whirl-induced borehole patterns, and then the pattern being eliminated deeper down. And that's taken from an SPE paper written by Fred DePriest. which I highly recommend you read. And then there's another one referenced there. That's all that focuses more on bit gauge length. So if you've got a bit of time on your hands, I highly recommend those two papers. So I think that brings me to the end. So I'll be happy to take any questions though. I think we've got still about 10, 15 minutes left.
Oh, we've got all the time in the world. I don't have to go anywhere. So I don't know. You might have a job to do, but I sure don't. So for anybody that's watching, if you guys do have any questions, feel free to throw them out there. I have been keeping track of all the other questions that have been asked as he's going through the presentation. I try not to interrupt too much unless we get a couple of questions that are kind of back to back about the same thing, and we can address them as we're going through. So I've got questions that Diego, Felipe, Armin, Rolando asked. I forgot to put the names on a couple other ones. But the first one was from a prior business partner of mine, Abel Moreno. Great guy. Hopefully Abel is still watching. So here we go. Good morning, David Gibson. When analyzing BHAs for loss and hole events, what are the less obvious but critical BHA characteristics used for analysis?
The less obvious but critical BHA characteristics. Actually, one thing that so we spend a bit more time now and a bit more focus just in the last couple of years looking at stabilizer design. It's a piece of dumb iron that goes in the hole, and the varieties of stabilizers that used to go in the hole were incredible, and some really ugly pieces of steel were going down hole and causing problems when tripping out on ledges, etc. So Paul Pastusek from ExxonMobil wrote a great SPE paper a couple of years ago about physics-based stabilizer design, which I highly recommend. It is a couple of years old now, but it's a nice, good, simple, concise paper with some really good practical recommendations on stabilizer design, and lots of nice pictures as well. And really, so we now make that as part of our recommendations for BHA design, and a lot of operators seem to have adopted a similar approach, similar guidelines. But yeah, so stabilizers important, so it's not just for ease of tripping through rugose hole, through ledges, etc. It's also flow by area that's important for tripping through cuttings beds, because you've got to remember when you're tripping through these cuttings beds, the cuttings are flowing through those stabilizer blades. You're not pulling the BHA over the top of them. These are flowing through them, so you need to have good flow by area on stabilizers. So stabilizers, in short.
All right. So the next one we had was, does fit and lot adjust your model? So the formation integrity test and leak off test, does that adjust your models?
Well, I mean, you certainly have to, you have to start modeling sensitivities if you're not within your fit, within your leak off test, your fracture gradient that's determined by your leak off and FIT data from offset wells. So yeah, that's when you identified you don't have adequate margin. That's when you start having to run sensitivities and looking at how you can reduce your ECD and manage your ECD. And and the approach with that is the big hitters on ECD reduction often have a big impact on something else. So yeah. For example, you can underread, and that's going to have a big impact on your ECD reduction, but it's also going to have a big impact on your hole cleaning and your drilling dynamics. So there's a price to pay for everything. It's a balance, and so it's often a case of lots of smaller things added together on ECD management. So hopefully that answers this question.
Yeah, so then the next one we had, when you have real-time torque and drag model, you correct the coefficient of friction while you pull out a hole and run in hole? Question mark.
Yeah. So did he ask? Do you collect the coefficient of friction?
Do you correct?
Correct. Coefficient of friction. Well, you're not really correcting the. What you do, I mean, when you're tripping, you'll take rotating off bottom weights to verify your model data. You know, and your actual rotating off bottom weight should be lying on top of your theoretical, your model. And if they're not, then you need to relook at your model, and you need to adjust something. And that's the only time you'd be sort of messing with the model data and the friction factors. Otherwise, you know, if the model's calibrated, the model stays as it is. And then if your data's deviating from your previous trend, then you need to start doing some sort of investigation to identify why, and looking at what's changed downhole, you know, before it becomes a problem.
Yeah, it's not a good idea to change calibration to fit the answers you want.
That's right. Yeah, there is a danger that people do that. Yeah.
It's one of those MWD things where people start changing the gamma scale factor once the tool's downhole. They're like, oh, this doesn't look right. Well, we'll just change the scale factor here till it looks right. That's not how things work.
No, you'll get yourself into all sorts of problems doing that. That's why our parameters box on our software is non-editable, so you can see what the inputs have been.
So the next one was, while drilling with water-based mud and the formation absorbs the mud and forms balling/swelling, is it also a geological limit?
Yeah, it's a good question whether you define that as a geological limit or not. I think you know, so you've just weakened your formation by allowing water intake through having a non-inhibitive drilling fluid. So you've essentially changed changed one of your limits, your wellbore stability limit, by weakening the formation. So yeah, so I mean, directly itself, it's not a limit, but you've altered the limit by using a non-inhibitive fluid.
Okay. Yeah. So the next one was I started keeping track of names, so I apologize for the prior questions that were asking. I didn't guys have y'all's names. So blank home on the next one. Does a super straight wellbore, such as what some rotary steerables can deliver, actually increase the risk of differential sticking? Is bad wellbore, quote unquote, quality a good thing in this regard?
An interesting one. Well,
yeah, Blaine's got to ask the fun ones.
No, so simple answer is no. I don't think so. You know, when you think about most wellbores, the dog legs that we're talking about, in most standard wellbores, it's it's the tool joints that are in contact with the wellbore, unless you've got some very high dog leg, and then you've got pipe body in contact with the wellbore, which would then elevate your differential sticking risk slightly. But it's very unusual to get stuck differentially on drill pipe. It's almost always drill collars and heavyweight drill pipe. So you're not going to get much more contact, with some sort of tortuosity in your wellbore than you would if you were drilling a very straight tangent. Is that clear enough, do you think?
I think so. All right, so let's see, where are we at here? Okay, Diego, what about connection practices? How relevant is this for hole cleaning related problems?
Yeah, good question. So connection practices are relevant for hole cleaning related problems in two ways. One, for collecting really good, consistent torque and drag data. So, checking really for hole cleaning, its drag. That's going to give you. It's much more responsive to a hole loading up. The drag is and torque. So it's just consistently collecting good data on connections, and having a practice that's repeatable. So your assistant driller, your tool pusher, on both shifts, and are all following the same procedure, moving the block at the same speed, taking the weights at the same height, and then you'll get a good trend, and that will allow you to stay on top of your hole cleaning monitoring. And then the other aspect is remedial hole cleaning on connections. So it's your opportunity to catch up on hole cleaning if you feel the hole is loading up to the point where it's potentially becoming a problem. In which case you have an opportunity to do some cleaning by reaming the connection. However, we would recommend avoiding rotating off bottom whenever possible. So you would only do that if you really think you've got an issue with friction factor divergence and the hole is really loading up to the point where it's going to be an issue.
Excellent. So then, keep losing my place here. So Felipe asks, Dupreece always emphasizes the hole enlargement is the big problem. Once created, never can be fixed. The remaining can be managed. Hard to identify while drilling, unless with a caliper in one of LWD tools. What do you think?
I agree with Fred.
It's hard to disagree with him, but
no. So, yeah, I mean, hole cleaning is. I mean, hole enlargement is the source of a lot of problems in drilling. It's the source of a lot of hole cleaning problems. It's the source of a lot of tripping problems, cementing problems, and and often you don't identify it until you see cavings over the shakers. I don't think whoever asked the question mentioned. Did they say that you would only identify it if you had caliper log or an image log?
Something, with caliper in one of the LWD tools.
Yeah, I mean, most of the time you're picking it up with identifying cavings. I used to work on a rig in the North Sea, the GA3, and they had the old cavings identification posters. Have you seen them? So you've got lots of different types of cavings, and it describes them. And they used to put these posters all over the rig behind all the toilet doors. So when everyone went to the toilet at the rig, they had nothing to look at other than these cavings posters. So everybody on that rig knew how to identify cavings pretty well. So if anybody, the key people obviously the shaker hands, and identify, so they know how to do it. And then having a system whereby you can quantitatively identify how many cavings are coming over the shakers and a standard process. So it's not somebody just swagging it when they go down to the shakers. It's someone who they're collecting a sample, they're identifying what percentage of that sample is cavings, some assessment of what type of caving it is, and recording it and taking pictures of it and sending it into the geomechanics specialists in town if necessary. So, cavings analysis is probably one of your best tools for identifying wellbore instability early.
All right. I highlight all the questions we've already asked. So then we have two questions that were kind of back to back that were very similar. So Armin Federico and Rolando both kind of asking the similar kind of, what about utilization of high angle mud motors with short bit to bends? And then Rolando asked about high speed rotation with 2-degree mud motor and hull. So both kind of around the topic of having a high degree, positive displacement motors in the hull. So
high degree, so high bends.
Yes.
Yeah. You should have asked that to Brandon last week, shouldn't he, really? But Yeah, I mean, they're a problem when it comes to hole cleaning, and not just that, but they're drilling enlarged hole. Just by the when you're in rotary mode, they are drilling enlarged hole, so they're a problem. And they but there are ways around it, and particularly in smaller hole sizes, you can, an 8.5-inch hole, you can drill some pretty long laterals, 6-inch hole with motors, and get away with rotary speeds lower than you would need for larger hole sizes. Because of course it's easy for, there are examples. It's easy to find examples of very long laterals that have been drilled with motors, with pretty low rotary speeds when in rotary mode, and have still managed to clean the hole. However, those holes will have been gauged. They'll have generally been smaller hole sizes with high annular velocities, with probably pretty decent mud rheology as well. So they're only kind of compromising in one area, which is the rotary speed, and often not far from what we'd recommend for smaller hole sizes anyway. So there can be a problem, but there are ways of mitigating it. But I would always recommend running the smallest bend possible.
I think that's definitely been something that has everybody that I have talked to as far as on this show have all recommended running the lowest bend angle possible. I think if we can get away from some of the slick BHAs, gauge bits, lower bend angle help out. Just my thoughts, but I don't know anything. That's why we have people like you come on the show and be able to tell us. So I've got a handful more questions, and there's more questions coming in. If at any point in time you need to go, please let me know. But we'll keep firing off, guys. I'm trying to keep up with the questions that you guys are asking. I really do appreciate it. Please share, please tag, please comment, and most importantly, please connect with Neil. Neil also does the Friday Haggler, where he posts something on Fridays. It kind of gives everybody a quiz. Sometimes they're multiple choice. And it's a great way to be able to interact with him and some of the other guys at Merlin. Everybody kind of gets involved in the conversation. So be sure to send him a connection request as soon as you can. So the next question was from Jamie. How difficult do you find it to change culture in an organization? Trying to get past I've been drilling for 20 years. I don't need you to tell me how to design a BHA. Choose a bit, tell me, or how to trip, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Actually, Brandon talked about that last week, saying that's from his perspective was one of the hardest things to do, and I would tend to agree. It is really difficult, but it kind of depends on what environment you're in. If there's a problem at the rig site, and then you turn up to the rig site and you try to change people's minds about what they need to do, that's hard. But when you've got the team together and they're in a neutral environment, in a classroom, on a training course, or at a DWOP, then it's much easier. People aren't under pressure like they are at the rig after a problem event. You're in a neutral environment, and you can get people really just thinking and talking about the actual physics of what's going on downhole. So once you're in that situation, it's actually, it takes a couple of days though. If you just get people in for a morning and try and do it, it's not going to work. You need to kind of win people's trust and make them realize that you're not there to try and prove more than anybody else. You're actually there to try and improve things for them. And that normally takes a good couple of days.
Yeah, I've seen it as one of those things that somebody has already reached outside of the organization for somebody to come in and do consulting work, that they've already opened their minds to being able to potentially change and be able to do something new. It's the organizations where that hasn't happened, where it's going to be a little bit more difficult to be able to get the cultural shift.
Yeah, but unless the person who's bringing some external help in is the enlightened one, who's surrounded by unenlightened ones, that they've got to drag along with them, then that's a challenge.
So that was Jimmy's. So this one was from Margarita. How do we how we okay, this is how would you deal with the or an event where you are dealing with two or more situations? So, example, you have wellbore instability and differential sticking at the same time.
Yeah, actually, that's a brilliant question, because that's not unusual, and that's what makes it often difficult to identify what the root cause of the problem is, because it's often, there's a couple of factors. There's some it's the old Swiss cheese model. It's often a few things that have lined up that have resulted in the final stuck pipe event. So yeah, it makes it a lot harder, but it's not unusual. I was looking at one just last week, a problem event where it was almost like a textbook example of how not to clean a hole. Everything was out of spec, and then they had a couple of stuck pipe events on the way out the hole, but they managed to get free, and then they got stuck over a connection, and the conclusion was, it was inadequate hole cleaning, but actually it was differential sticking, because they had full circulation after the connection, and they were stationary for about 10 minutes over a permeable zone with 3 unsupported drill collars. But all the other leading indicators, but there'd been no previous indication that the hole was sticky. All other indicators had been that the hole was not clean, was inadequately clean. So yeah, I mean, it makes it difficult. But I suppose you just got to really pay more attention to the detail to figure out what the actual root cause is.
So, Margarita, thank you for that question. Excellent question. So now we got one from Josh Huntus. He's a directional driller. Can bit whirl be controlled by limiting ROP, or will ROP factor into it?
Can bit whirl be controlled by limiting ROP? You're actually more likely to generate whirl by limiting your ROP. You want to maintain a high depth of cut in order to keep the bit stable and limit side cutting and whirl. So you want high weight on bit and high depth of cut, and you want to avoid control drilling. So often what operators are doing, certainly ExxonMobil these days, is dumbing down bits. Adding depth of cut control to bits, so you can get more weight without the ROP increasing. So you're limiting the ROP by bit design rather than by drilling parameters, which would have a negative effect on vibrations and whirl. I hope I answered that adequately.
I believe so. Thank you, sir. I would say, for anybody who does want to look up things about BHA whirl or whirl in general, Fred DePriest has got a lot of SPE papers out there about it. Or you can just email or talk to Fred, and if you just send him an email, he will respond. Just going to say that. It's probably going to overload his inbox, but I'm just saying it's not hard to find his email address either. So if you can't do those two things, then you can't be helped.
Yeah, I recommend you just get stuck into his SPE papers. One of them I referenced on the second to last slide, which was related to whirl-induced borehole patterns, and then there's other papers then referenced that you'll find from there. But yeah, now's a good time to do a bit of reading if you're not so busy.
Yeah, if somebody watching in the comment section has that number handy, feel free to just pop it into the comment section and tag anybody that you feel like. All right, so I'm gonna get the last couple of questions in here. I know that because we just keep getting them; they keep coming in since this is such a good session. What are your thoughts on jar placement in long horizontals? That question comes from Adam. Thanks, Adam.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. So. Yeah, when we run training courses, we'll often have a big debate about, should you run jars? Shouldn't you run jars? Our approach is your run jars, if you're going to get, because you never know where you're going to get stuck. You could get stuck even if you know at the end of your lateral or TD towards TD in your long ERD well, even if you know you're unlikely to be able to cock your jar, you still don't know where you're going to get stuck. You could get stuck on the way out the hole much shallower, and you'll look a little bit foolish if you haven't got a jar in the BHA in that case. So yeah, run jars. Where would I put them? I'd put them as close as possible to the most likely stuck point, which would be my BHA. So and if it was a bit of a long high angle section, I'd run minimal heavyweight above, minimal heavyweight below, to give me myself the most chance of being able to cock the jar and not worry too much about impact force. And I'd run a hydraulic jar. Next.
Next one. Some operators record torque and drag while pumping, some while pumps off. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, good question. I suppose the quick answer is, providing you do it consistently, it's not that important. However, the preference would be to do it with pumps off, because almost all models will be modeling your pickup weight, slack off weights with the assumption that there's no pumps on, so there's no hydraulic uplift. So your actuals will then more closely match your model. You're rotating off bottom weight will more closely match your model, because that's what the model is assuming, that the pumps are off. And also, another thing is, it then gives you the opportunity to, when you're tripping at a hole or back in hole, to check what your pickup and slack off, to compare your pickup and slack off readings with what they were when you're drilling. Because when you're tripping, you're not going to have the pumps on, so you get a better comparison between the two. So I'd say those are probably the best arguments I've got for doing it with pumps off.
All right,
it is one less variable to control. Yeah, so it's one less variable to control, so you get more consistent data. There you go.
Alrighty, so here we go. What are your views on hole cleaning during horizontal wells? Do you recommend short wiper trips or on regular intervals? I know what Fred said to this one.
Yeah, he probably fell off his chair. But yeah, no. So we would never recommend a wiper trip as part of a hole cleaning strategy. The only benefit you're going to get from a wiper trip is the cleanup cycle you do before you do your wiper trip. And then as soon as you get back to bottom again and start drilling ahead, the cuttings bed's just going to go up to the level it was at previously before you did your cleanup. But there's a difference between a wiper trip and a check trip back to bottom. So if you're about to run casing, it's a critical casing run, you've got some concerns about the well bore, and you've just tripped to the shoe, and then you want to check trip back to bottom. That's a bit different. But just planned wiper trips at set intervals, specified predetermined depths is kind of old school and not really beneficial. I mean, you're also adding swab and surge unnecessarily to the well. So I wouldn't recommend it.
All right, so we'll do this last one, somewhat of a technical one here. So Neil, please, if we are using RSS and I observed laminar interfacial severity lithology, hard and soft formation with small thickness, I want a better MSE, so increase weight on bit and RPM. But also we have vibration. Which will be the best action to take in order to have a good ROP and avoid bit and BHA damage?
Yeah, I mean, well,
I threw everything at you there.
You finished with that one.
Yeah, that's why I finished on that one. I was like, all right, let's go out with a doozy here.
I mean, it kind of depends on what the vibration is, what type of vibration it is, on how you would respond. So, and the fact that it's, you've got laminated, interbedded formations. I couldn't, from that I couldn't conclude what type of vibration it is, and therefore offer a solution. So no, I mean it's difficult to say.
Yeah, that's one of those put you in the trickiest situations possible, and then come out with an answer with not enough data. So Neil, thank you so much for being here. I would recommend to anybody that is out there, please go and connect with Neil. Also with Ian McCourt. Who else is Stuart McGregor is there on the team as well. Any of the other people from Merlin have been a great resource. A lot of them are really active on LinkedIn. Like we said, Neil does the Friday Haggler, so be sure to catch that whenever you can. There's a lot of resources out there, guys. These are people that are interactive with the community, that want to be able to help people, have better drilling practices. It helps all of us. The less VHAs we stick at hole, the better, more efficient all of us are. So thanks everybody for watching. Brian Dugas, Juan Munoz, France, Drone, all the people that are commenting right now. We really, really do appreciate it. And I am going to finish with this last question for anybody that is still out there watching. Guys, let me know. You can send me a message or create a post or something like that. What other class sessions do you guys want to be able to do? I've already talked to Amy Fox to be able to potentially do something on geomechanics. If I've got some other people lined up to potentially do some stuff with managed pressure drilling. If there's any other topics, other things that you guys would like to see, please reach out to me. Let me know. I'll try to line it up. I'm trying to get as much of this in before we go back to normal life and we're all just staring at our computers and doing actual work instead of being able to sit at home and watch great little information sessions like this on a Wednesday. And just for anybody that's still watching, you guys missed this yesterday. I debuted this yesterday, but I gave myself a quarantine haircut, and I might have missed a spot or two. But that is leaving my head today. So
that's special.
Yeah, it was a fun little project we did this week. I was like, what's something silly I could do for this week since I was going live 4 days in a row? Yeah, and that's, by the way, guys, tomorrow I'll be going live with George King. So be sure to come back and check that one out. Trying to see. Thanks, guys, so much. Peter, Blancomo, Brandon Foster was even watching today. So you two guys have been watching each other. I appreciate everybody out there. Like I said, I'll go back through and look at all the comments and everything. If we missed anything, I'll try to be able to address them or at least get them passed over to Neil. Neil, any last words? Anything you'd like to be able to share, sir?
Just thanks for having me on, and and appreciate everybody for joining us, and for all the questions. There were some doozies.
Yeah, definitely the last one. So, as always, guys, thank you guys so much for watching. We really do appreciate it. Please, if y'all still won't, as we're still going live here, please tag somebody in the comments. This will link directly to them, give them the chance to be able to know that this exists and be able to come back and watch and hopefully be able to take something away from it and be able to add it to their resume that they have watched at least one episode of the Vidor Locksmith. And with that, guys, thank you so much. As always, know your industry. Play this.